fantasy football season right around the corner. And if you need some draft advice and preseason advice here, I'm going to go through it as the weeks go on. So, with a couple weeks before most people's draft, I know I got a few drafts at the end of the month here. And the first week is September, obviously, before the season starts. September 8th with the Dallas Cowboys at the Tampa Bay Bucks. But here's a few quarterbacks I would look to avoid heading into your draft days this season. The first guy is Deshaun Watson of the Houston Texans. So Watson, we know he's a great talent. We know he's one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in all of fantasy football over the last 2 or 3 seasons here. But right now, we just don't know what's going to go on with Watson. Obviously, he's had the crazy off-the-field issues, true or not, over the last off-season here. And now coming into the season, there's reports that the Eagles and Texans were close on a deal. I don't know if that's true or not true, even though I think the Eagles, in my opinion, should stay away and see what they got with Jalen Hurts, because obviously in the few games he started last season, he showed a lot of flashes. But right here, last season, Watson had another great year. 4,823 passing yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 444 rushing yards, 3 TDs, a 2-point conversion, and 3 fumble losses. But right here, Deshaun Watson, I don't know what we're going to get from him this season, and we don't know if he's going to play or not. To be real here, this year is Watson, because Watson right now, he's still one of the best ranked quarterbacks in fantasy football coming into the season here. But right now, we don't know if he's going to play or not. We don't know if he's going to be on the team. And he's a guy too much of a headache to draft in fantasy leagues, especially where he's going coming into the season. So right now, if I got Watson sitting there on the board, he's a guy I'm going to avoid. And right now, he's going... So Watson's a guy right now I would avoid in my fantasy leagues. And he's going in the later rounds. They got him projected right now 298th going into the season. So he's a guy no one's trusting, but he's a guy I'm making sure I'm going to avoid this season, because there's no certainty if he's going to play or not. The next quarterback I would avoid heading into fantasy drafts this season is Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz finally got traded from the Philadelphia Eagles in the offseason to the Indianapolis Colts, and that's a great landing spot for him, no doubt about it, with Frank Reich, his former offensive coordinator in Philly, and pretty decent weapons in T.Y. Hilton, Jonathan Taylor, Naeem Hines out of the backfield. You also got Michael Pittman Jr., so pretty good nucleus over there in Indianapolis. But once again, before the season's even started, Carson Wentz is hurt. He's banged up, and the owner said they're not going to rush him back from the foot injury and the foot surgery. But reports are saying he should be ready week 1 versus the Seattle Seahawks. But Carson Wentz, let's be honest, the last few seasons he's been banged up, and he hasn't been good for fantasy. Last year, 2620 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, 276 rushing yards with 5 rushing TDs and 4 fumble losses. So he had a lot of turnovers at 19 last season. And I know this group here with Indy's a little better than Philly, especially that offensive line protecting them. But right off the bat already here for Carson Wentz, he's a player that's already hurt, and he's projected in the later rounds as well, anywhere from the 12th to the 14th round. He's been going in early mock drafts. But right now, the only way I'm going to draft Carson Wentz, honestly, if I'm in a 2-quarterback league. But if you're in a normal 12, 10-team league where you start one guy, and if you want to have a backup quarterback, go for it. But I'm just saying, I wouldn't draft Carson Wentz. You can't count on him. He's already banged up. The foot injury's no joke, obviously. And he's a guy you don't want to deal with out of the gate already with a player hurt on your team. You want to get off to a quick start. And in fantasy drafts, you don't want to draft guys that are injured off the bat. You want to get off to that 2-0, 3-0 start and not wait for guys coming back from injury. So I think Carson Wentz is an easy quarterback to avoid this season in drafts. The next quarterback I would avoid going into drafts this season is Jimmy Garoppolo of the San Francisco 49ers. Trey Lance, they've been great things coming out of camp about him this offseason so far. And Lance, they picked him high in the NFL draft for a season, but right now he's listed as the starter, Jimmy G. And he's another guy, tons of injuries throughout his career, including last season where he had 1,096 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, 5 intos, and 25 rushing yards on the season. We thought Jimmy G might have been traded back to the New England Patriots in the offseason, but that wasn't the case. They went with Cam Newton and Mac Jones over there in the draft. But right here, Jimmy G, he knows he's looking over his shoulder. We know he's injury prone. And let's be real, the San Francisco 49er team, they don't have many weapons in the receiving corps. Only George Kittle, obviously, as the big guy. Then I know you got Deebo Samuel, but he's always hurt. Brandon Ayuk, he had a pretty good rookie season last year with the 49ers. But right now, I just can't trust Jimmy G. And the same thing as Wentz. And only in 2 quarterback leagues, I would go out there and get him. But in basic leagues with a starter and a backup, there's no need to get Jimmy G. And to be honest, I could even see by week 3 or 4 him not be the starter here for the 49ers. So Jimmy Garoppolo is an easier guy to avoid at the quarterback position this season. The next quarterback's Matt Ryan. So Matty Ice, his first season without Julio Jones here after Julio Jones got traded to the Tennessee Titans later on in the offseason. And they're projecting still Matt Ryan 29 touchdowns, 12 interceptions with 4,100 yards, which is still a pretty decent number. Last season for him, 4,581 yards, 26 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 92 rushing yards, 2 rushing TDs, and a 2-point conversion. But now, I just can't, without Julio Jones, obviously that's a big part of the offense gone. There's no Todd Gurley over there this season, even though he broke down at the end of the year. And I know they got Pitts in the draft, was a big pickup for them. But I just don't see Matt Ryan having that great year once again. I know he'll get a lot of passing yards, especially if this team's trailing in games. And he still has a true number 1 in Calvin Ridley. But Julio Jones, in my opinion, is a huge loss, no doubt about it. And Matt Ryan, those numbers are going to go down. And I think the turnover numbers are going to go up as well here, because a lot of 50-50 balls he would throw to Julio Jones. And most times than not, he would come down with the catch. But now with no Julio, it's going to be an adjustment. And I just think Matt Ryan's not a guy I'm really going to target. And he's been going anywhere from the 8th to 10th round so far in the early on in drafts. But right now, there's a bunch of quarterbacks on the board before him. And he's a guy I'm going to try to avoid this season here in fantasy football, especially with no Julio Jones and the turnover struggles he's had over the last few seasons. And the 5th and final quarterback I would avoid this season in fantasy drafts is Dak Prescott. It's not that I don't think he'll have a good year, but already with the injury concerns. Last season, the devastating ankle dislocation that cost him the season from week 4 on. And who knows if he's even 100% from that. That's a major surgery he got. That's a major injury. All reports on that side of things with his leg and ankle are obviously good. But right now, there's a shoulder issue with Prescott. And we know Prescott, he came out of the gate on fire last season, yards almost, in only 4 or 5 games that he played before going down with the injury. And this season, they're projecting another monster year for Prescott. 4,130 yards, 30 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 845 rushing yards, and 7 rushing touchdowns. But now he's got a shoulder injury. And I think there's more to the story than the Cowboys just being cautious with Prescott. And obviously, they're going to play with kid gloves with him. He's their franchise quarterback. They paid him a monster extension finally in the offseason here, is Prescott. But right now, he's going early in fantasy drafts, 4th or 5th round, even 3rd round. I've seen in a couple mock drafts him go. And right now, with his injury concerns and what's going on, that's a red flag. Obviously, if you could get Prescott in the 7th or 8th round, you draft him. But right now, the way he's going and his ADP, he's a player I'm going to avoid at all costs right now. And this shoulder injury, we'll see what the MRI comes back and says. But Prescott, we'll see what happens right now. But I'm going to avoid him. And he's another injury-plagued player right now for this Cowboy team and for fantasy owners. And I know right now this Cowboy team, they're stacked on offense. Amari Cooper, obviously. You got Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, they're expecting a monster season out of, which I definitely could see here. This guy is one of the best rookies drafted in the last few seasons out of college here. And also you got Zeke Elliott, who's obviously in better shape and working on his pass catching. And Tony Pollard, a decent backup. So I know he's got all the weapons, but the injuries are what concern me. So if Prescott's going earlier in drafts, I'm going to avoid that. If I could get him later in the drafts, then I'm going to take him. But right now, those are a few quarterbacks I'm going to avoid here heading into your fantasy drafts within the next couple weeks.